What do you know about the 1318 Treaty of Leake? Can we characterize it as a fragile peace in Edward II's England? The Treaty of Leake, signed in August 1318, stands as a pivotal moment in the troubled reign of Edward II, reflecting the deep-seated tensions between the Crown and the English baronage. This treaty, though it temporarily quelled the civil unrest that had plagued Edward's reign, ultimately underscored the weaknesses of his rule and the persistent power struggle between the monarchy and the barons. Let us examine the context, terms, and significance of the Treaty of Leake, shedding light on the broader implications for Edward II's reign and the turbulent politics of early 14th century England. The context leading to the Treaty of Leake. Edward II's reign was marred by political instability, largely stemming from his reliance on unpopular favorites and his inability to assert strong leadership. His father, Edward I, had left him a kingdom fraught with unresolved issues, including tensions with Scotland and France, but it was Edward II's own actions that exacerbated the internal strife. Central to this was his alleged homosexual relationship with Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight who became the king's closest companion and advisor. Gaveston's influence over Edward and his perceived arrogance alienated many of the English barons, who saw him as a threat to their traditional rights and influence. The Ordinances of 1311, a set of regulations imposed by the barons, sought to curb the king's power and remove Gaveston from his position. Although Edward was forced to agree to the ordinances, he did so reluctantly, and his attempts to protect Gaveston led to further conflict. Gaveston's eventual capture and execution in 1312 by a group of rebel barons, including Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, only deepened the animosity between Edward and his nobility. The years following Gaveston's death were marked by ongoing tensions and a series of military confrontations between the king and the barons. Edward's favoritism towards new advisors, particularly Hugh Despenser the Younger and his father, Hugh Despenser the Elder, rekindled the baronial opposition. The Despensers' rise to power, coupled with Edward's continued failures in his military campaigns against Scotland, particularly the disastrous defeat at Bannockburn in 1314, further eroded his authority. By 1317, the kingdom was on the brink of civil war. Thomas of Lancaster, who had emerged as the leader of the opposition, controlled much of the north of England and posed a significant threat to Edward's rule. It was in this context of escalating tensions and the looming possibility of widespread conflict that negotiations for the Treaty of Leake began. The negotiation and terms of the treaty. The Treaty of Leake was the result of protracted negotiations between representatives of Edward II and the rebel barons, led by Thomas of Lancaster. The negotiations were mediated by a group of bishops and other neutral magnates, who were keen to prevent the kingdom from descending into outright civil war. The treaty was signed at the Priory of Leake in Nottinghamshire on August 9, 1318. The primary objective of the treaty was to restore peace between the king and his barons and to re-establish a functional government. To this end, the treaty included several key provisions. Restoration of offices and lands. The treaty required the king to restore to the barons any offices, lands, or rights that had been taken from them. This was particularly significant for Thomas of Lancaster, who had been stripped of several of his holdings and titles. Pardon and reconciliation. The treaty granted a general pardon to all those who had participated in the opposition against the king, effectively absolving the rebel barons of any wrongdoing. This was a crucial element in ensuring that the barons would lay down their arms and return to the king's service. Limitation on the Despensers' power. One of the most contentious issues in the negotiations was the role of the Despensers. The treaty stipulated that Hugh Despenser the Younger and his father would be removed from their positions of influence, though this was only partially enforced. The Despensers were allowed to retain some of their lands and titles, but their power was significantly curtailed, at least temporarily. Reaffirmation of the Ordinances of 1311. The treaty reaffirmed the ordinances, which had been a major point of contention between the king and the barons. This included provisions for the regulation of royal finances and the administration of justice, which were intended to limit the king's ability to act without the counsel of his barons. Establishment of a council. The treaty established a council of barons to advise the king and oversee the implementation of the treaty's terms. This council was intended to ensure that the king adhered to the agreement and that the barons had a formal role in the governance of the kingdom. The aftermath and significance of the treaty. The Treaty of Leake succeeded in averting immediate civil war and brought a temporary halt to the hostilities between the king and the barons. However, it did not resolve the underlying issues that had led to the conflict, nor did it address the fundamental weaknesses of Edward II's rule. The peace established by the treaty was fragile and short-lived. One of the main reasons for the treaty's failure to achieve lasting peace was Edward's reluctance to fully comply with its terms, particularly regarding the dispensers. Despite the agreement, Edward quickly moved to restore the dispensers to their former positions of power, reigniting the baronial opposition. This led to the Dispenser War, 1321 to 1322, during which the barons, led by Lancaster, once again took up arms against the king. The Dispenser War culminated in the Battle of Boroughbridge in March 1322, where Lancaster was defeated and subsequently executed. With Lancaster's death, Edward was able to reassert his authority, and the dispensers became more powerful than ever. However, the brutality with which Edward dealt with his opponents only served to deepen the divisions within the kingdom. The Treaty of Leake is significant because it highlights the deepening crisis of royal authority during Edward II's reign. The fact that the king was forced to negotiate with his barons and accept limitations on his power is indicative of his weakness and the growing influence of the nobility. The treaty also underscores the extent to which personal relationships and rivalries, particularly the king's favoritism towards certain individuals, could destabilize the realm. Furthermore, the treaty's failure to bring about lasting peace foreshadowed the eventual downfall of Edward II. The continued unrest and the king's inability to manage his barons ultimately led to his deposition in 1327, following the invasion of England by his wife, Isabella, and her lover, Roger Mortimer. The Treaty of Leake, therefore, can be seen as a prelude to the broader collapse of Edward's reign. Conclusion. The Treaty of Leake was a critical episode in the reign of Edward II, reflecting both the challenges of his rule and the broader tensions between the monarchy and the baronage in early 14th century England. While the treaty temporarily halted the conflict between the king and his barons, it failed to address the root causes of the unrest, leading to further violence and the eventual downfall of Edward II. The treaty serves as a reminder of the fragile nature of medieval kingship and the complex interplay of power, loyalty, and ambition that characterized the politics of the period. In the end, the Treaty of Leake was less a solution to the problems of Edward II's reign and more a temporary respite in a long and bitter struggle for control of the kingdom. Thanks for listening. Like and comment. And please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious.